Tiseke Kasambala, Advocacy Director of the Africa Division with Human Rights Watch, has specialized expertise in state-sponsored repression and violence, international justice and economic, social and cultural rights such as the rights to health and housing. Kasambala joined the organization in 2004 as Zimbabwe's researcher and documented abuses surrounding the disputed presidential elections in 2008, marked by government-sponsored violence, the 2005 parliamentary elections in Zimbabwe, and the displacement of 700,000 people that was under the Operation Murambatsvina Zimbabweans during mass evictions in 2005. Before joining Human Rights Watch, Kasambala worked as a campaigner and acting researcher on Southern Africa for Amnesty International. She holds a master's degree in social sciences from the University of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. Tiseke Kasambala, welcome to Sahara TV.
Thank you.
Yeah, now we're going to start off by obviously talking about the forthcoming elections in Zimbabwe. And we know that you're one of those observers that were involved with the SADC meeting that was held recently. And we know that there's been some kind of static in terms of the exact election date, with one party, meaning ZANU-PF, saying that the elections should go ahead, and also the high courts within Zimbabwe suggesting that these elections should be held by July the 30th, I think. And then also the Tsvangirai section of the MDC saying that these elections should not go ahead before certain reforms are made. And I'm just going to quote what Tsvangirai actually stated in a statement. He said, "We need media reforms. We want a partial and non-partisan state media and a security sector which is professional and that does not campaign for any political party. We want a voter registration for anyone who wants to vote in the election, and therefore voters must not be disenfranchised. Whether an alien or first-time voter, they must be allowed to vote in the terms of the Constitution. The old Constitution is very clear as far as Amendment 19 is concerned, and it says that the President and the Prime Minister shall decide and consult each other. And I was not consulted," meaning Tsvangirai was not consulted by the other side, adding that we are worried about some individuals manipulating the courts on the issue of elections. So what was your observation in terms of all this?
Well, I think, first of all, I think our understanding was that the summit, which was due on June 9, is no longer going to take place. That's the SADC summit.
Right.
And that's because some of the heads of state are not available. And of course, in order for an extraordinary summit to take place, there needs to be a certain quorum of heads of state present at the summit. So they've postponed it, but it looks like there will be a summit coming up. Mm-hmm. And certainly, I think Prime Minister Tsvangirai is correct in saying that there needs to be a bit more time put in place to ensure that reforms take place before elections. And these reforms include, in our view at Human Rights Watch, issues such as media freedoms, equal access to the media by all parties, not just ZANU-PF, but all parties that are running for the elections, an independent Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, a cleaned up and updated voters' roll, free access to civil society activists to carry out voter education throughout the country. But also, most importantly, one of the things that we've been highlighting is the need to ensure that the security forces remain neutral and that they do not go out across the country intimidating and threatening the population as they have been doing currently.
In your findings, I know that you've covered this since 2004 and you've done an extensive research and actually written some reports on that. What were these kind of intimidations and acts of violence, if there were any, that you recorded? Can you give us some examples?
Yes, I mean, I think throughout Zimbabwe's history, especially since 2000, after the movement for democratic change was formed and became the main opposition to the Zimbabwe African National Union Patriotic Front, or ZANU-PF, we have seen a lot of widespread abuses, and these include killings, beatings, torture, displacement, burning of property, mainly perpetrated by ZANU-PF supporters and officials, but also, more worryingly, by the security forces, including the army and the police. And this culminated in 2008 in some of the worst violence that we have seen since the MDC formation came into place to challenge ZANU-PF. In 2008, after President Mugabe lost the first round, it necessitated a runoff. And in the build-up to that runoff, there was such widespread violence, and I was on the ground documenting this violence.
Right.
People were beaten horrifically, there was torture, there was killings, and all orchestrated by the heads and senior officials of the security forces. And that's why we're saying that before these elections take place, the security forces need to make a public commitment to remaining neutral and not interfering in the political and electoral affairs of the country.
I'm going to quote you on the statement that you actually made in this past week. You said the coming elections are an important step in ending the country's long-standing human rights crisis. It was SADC that brokered the power-sharing government reached after the bloody 2008 elections, and the bloc remains the guarantor of that political uneasy deal. So you describe it as an uneasy deal, and also you put the blame, not the blame, but also the responsibility of SADC. From your own assessment, how far has SADC, been concerned about this from the reports that you've presented to them?
Well, I think SADC have played a very important role, and to the greatest extent possible, they have attempted to usher in a period of stability in Zimbabwe after the 2008 elections. Like you rightly said, they're the ones who brokered this deal that brought into place a unity government between the two MDC factions and ZANU-PF. However, it was an uneven deal because it gave greater powers to ZANU-PF, and ZANU-PF retained control of the security forces, Home Affairs and Home Affairs Ministry, which was, it was co-run by both the MDC and ZANU-PF, but ZANU-PF had greater influence over the Ministry of Home Affairs. And as we know, the Ministry of Home Affairs is responsible for the security forces. ZANU-PF also had the Ministry of Justice, they had the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So they retained greater control over this unity government. In fact, during the period of the unity government from 2009, we have seen MDC officials abused and arrested time and again. Right. And the Co-Minister of Home Affairs, Teresa Makoni, being almost helpless to deal with that. So what we're saying is that ZANU-PF has continued on its abusive ways, even though there was far less violence during the tenure of the unity government. In addition to that, repressive laws remain in place. So despite this new constitution that was ushered in, we see that there's the Public Order and Security Act, the Access to Information and Protection of Privacy Act, the Criminal Law and Codification Act. All these laws only serve to hinder the rights of Zimbabweans to free expression, to free association and assembly, and criminalize independent reporting, and are used to attack and arbitrarily arrest civil society activists in the country. All these things need to be dealt with before election. Yeah,
I also quote you on another topic, a quote that you made. You said Zimbabwe's unity government is going to have to rein in the security forces and keep them out of politics if the elections are going to have any meaning. And you said it's on the record that most of them have pledged allegiance to ZANU-PF, and when you mean them, I'm sure you mean the security forces, including the prisons, the police and the army. And you said they've pledged allegiance to ZANU-PF, and I'm referring to the army, like I said. And some have actually called Tsvangirai a puppet of the West and called him a psychiatric patient. I'll quote the Zimbabwe Defense Forces commander, Constantine Chiwenga, who vowed not to meet Tsvangirai to discuss security sector reforms. He says, "We have no time to meet sellouts." Clearly, Tsvangirai is a psychiatric patient who needs a competent psychiatrist. So this is obviously what you're referring to, where these security forces continue to actually discredit a member of the unity government who is the prime minister of that country.
Yes, indeed. And it's these types of inflammatory statements that translate into the type of violence that we've seen on the ground in the past. So they're not just making mere statements, or it's not just mere rhetoric. Actually, what these commanders say ends up being acted upon by certain members of the security forces. So anyone who supports the MDC is seen as a traitor or as betraying the liberation movement or the liberation struggle, Zimbabwe's liberation struggle. So this language that calls the Morgan Tsvangirai a puppet, a sellout, when the security forces say they can't salute Morgan Tsvangirai because they've been fighting the liberation struggle, it is more than just statements. What it actually translates into is violence. And that's our concern. But also let's make it clear that Zimbabwe's own laws and the new constitution call for neutrality and impartiality from the security forces. And also the laws say that any members of security forces who behave in a partisan manner or who clearly support one party over the other and do not remain neutral should face the full arm of the law. But we have not seen this. Yeah.
So obviously this new constitution is something on a piece of paper. Do you think it will hold any meaning with what's been going on?
I think what the problem in Zimbabwe, especially in the past 13 or so years, hasn't been, it has been partially some of the bad laws that I've articulated already, that I've spoken about, but also it has been the government, especially ZANU-PF's willingness and ability to circumvent the rule of law and to ignore the country's own laws to commit widespread abuses. So we have seen them, judges in the past, make important judgments against ZANU-PF or against actions by ZANU-PF, and ZANU-PF blatantly ignoring them. Police being directed to do something and the police blatantly ignoring those rulings. So even the past constitution had some very good elements in it that protected people's rights. But ZANU-PF constantly sidestepped those elements, sidestepped those sections of the constitution, or attempted to amend them in its favor. So this new constitution may be strong on paper, and it certainly is an improvement on the past constitution. But the question is, is the Southern African Development Community, SADC, going to be able to apply enough pressure on ZANU-PF so that they follow the full constitution of the law and respect Zimbabweans' rights?
When you talk about pressure, what is entailed in this kind of pressure? Is it having more of these meetings and then once they're out, people continue to perpetrate? Is there going to be a measure to say that let there be a drastic a change in terms of these atrocities or violence being committed by the supporters of this party to the next party? What measures do you think SADC should put in place? Because of late, we've had SADC member states who had been silent after sanctions were being imposed on Zimbabwe, and then recently changed their rhetoric and started saying, well, the sanctions didn't work, so therefore they must be uplifted if we're going to go through the elections so people can have, a relationship in terms of making that unity government work. And obviously those sanctions were eased. So what kind of pressure are we talking about when we talk about SADC, and what kind of pressure can they put through?
Yes, I think in the past and at various times, SADC has not placed enough sustained pressure on President Robert Mugabe and ZANU-PF to change their ways. At the same time, one of the reasons they are planning to hold this meeting is to discuss funding of the elections.
Right.
And this is because the Zimbabwean government, Finance Minister Tendai Biti made it clear that the government does not have the resources to hold an election. So SADC leaders one of the things we're going to discuss, the priority was to discuss putting together funds, possibly mainly coming from the South African government, to run these elections. Right. That is a huge point of leverage. If SADC manages to put together the funds or tries to go to other governments, possibly in the West, to fund these elections, they have a point of leverage to say, we are not willing to fund elections that are not going to be free, fair, and credible. And that these are the commitments we'd like to see from you before we put together the funds for these elections. That's the pressure point,
right.
To say, you know what? Unless these steps are taken, there's free media access, a free human rights environment, no violence, a neutral security forces, etc. These are the commitments we'd like to see. But also, you must remember that SADC has guidelines and principles that govern democratic elections.
Right.
They set out the various steps that governments within Southern Africa should put into place in order to hold free, fair, and credible elections.
What are these guidelines, basically?
Those guidelines.
What are the guidelines,
Well,
in basic terms?
these guidelines have various obligations. They place various obligations on states
Right.
to respect various international human rights standards around elections. That means freedom of the right to freedom of expression, freedom of information, freedom of association and assembly, equal access to the media freedoms, no violence. There's a whole raft of standards that these guidelines and principles have
Okay.
that seek to oblige states to ensure that there's an open environment, a human rights respecting environment before elections and during the elections, of course.
Okay. So now, Zimbabwe is one of those countries in recent years that obviously discovered diamonds. And a lot of people would have the knowledge that there are obviously so much diamonds worth over millions of dollars, obviously. And they would be wondering, where is this money going to and who is it benefiting? And why would then Zimbabwe be looking out for handouts, to hold their own elections? Has then anything crossed the table along those lines?
Well, I mean, we would hope so. I mean, I think those are issues that SADC should certainly be raising with the government of Zimbabwe. But as you know, we also documented in the past how the Zimbabwean army basically took over the Marangwe diamond fields.
Right.
And killed scores of artisanal miners and beat and tortured scores more. And now they basically run huge parts of the Marangwe diamond fields. So the army, again, is playing a very critical role in Zimbabwe. The army has its hands on these resources. No one knows what's happening to these resources from the diamonds. We committed widespread smuggling that involved senior army officials and soldiers. That is also a problem, and that's why we keep highlighting the role of the security forces around elections in Zimbabwe, because the stakes are pretty high. If, let's say, we went to elections and perhaps the MDC won,
Right.
the army is not confident that they will remain in the diamond fields and they'll have access to those resources. So SADC should be aware of this, these kinds of issues and these problems, and that's why they, at this whatever forthcoming summit, they need to take President Robert Mugabe and ZANU-PF to task and question them about some of these issues.
So roughly, when do you think the next SADC meeting will be held? Because obviously the 9th is only tomorrow. Today is the 8th. When do you think that this meeting will be held, and how soon will that be?
Well, from what we've seen in reports, it seems that they've gone back to the table and everyone is trying to look at their schedules. So both the presidents are looking at the schedules when a significant number of them will be available. Certainly, time is running out, and I think they're well aware of the fact that time is running out, and they will want to meet as soon as they possibly can to start addressing some of these critical issues. So it may not be this week, but it could be in the next weekend or the coming weeks. I think we should see it in the next month or so.
Okay. Now, we also hear that the opposition parties have actually joined forces to actually try to push for these reforms against ZANU-PF. And how successful do you think this would be? And is that a good move that they have made?
Well, I think it's positive that the opposition is taking a unified stance on what are very important issues of reform. However, obviously, one can't exactly tell whether this kind of pressure will tell on ZANU-PF and President Robert Mugabe. I mean, in the past, they have been pretty good at ignoring such pressure, especially such internal pressure from the and basically bullying their way through and going ahead with what they think is best for them. So we'll see, and only time will tell whether the unified front from the opposition parties will remain and whether it will have any effect on ZANU-PF's action.
Okay. Tiseke Kasambala, thank you very much for coming to our program today on Sahara TV. We appreciate the update and the information you have actually shared with us. We will keep our ears to the ground, and as you say, only time will tell. So for now, thank you very much, and keep tuned. We still have more programming.